Book 2. In this book, we see elaborations of a theme suggest in 1-2 political order is not obtained by means of force or government regulations, but rather by the non-coercive influence of the morally perfected person. Several descriptions of such wu-wei perfection appear in this book, including Confucius' famous spiritual autobiography in 2-4, and we also find an extended discussion of the root virtue of filial piety that emphasizes the importance of having the proper internal. The master said, one who rules through the power of virtue is analogous to the pole star. It simply remains in its place and receives the homage of the myriad lesser stars. The point of this passage is that the spontaneous harmony brought about by heaven in the natural world is to be a model for the human ruler, who, in a wu-wei fashion, will bring the world to order silently, inevitably, and unself-consciously, through the power of his perfected moral virtue. As Bao Xian notes, one who possesses virtue is wu-wei, and, like the pole star, doesn't move yet receives the homage of the myriad lesser stars. The master said, the others number several hundred, and yet can be judged with a single phrase, oh, they will not lead you astray. The quoted phrase is from Ode 297. The original reference is two powerful war horses bred to pull chariots and trained not to swerve from the desired path. The metaphorical meaning is that one committed through the study to the Odes, yoked to them, as it were, will not be led astray from Confucian way. The master said, if you try to guide the common people with coercive regulations and keep them in line with punishments, the common people will become evasive and will have no sense of shame. If, however, you guide them with virtue and keep them in line by means of ritual, the people will have a sense of shame and will justify themselves. This passage represents another expression of the theme of ruling through the power of virtue rather than force. As Guo Xiang notes, if you apply governmental regulations, you may correct people's outer behavior, but in their hearts they will not have submitted. Concerned only with expediency and evasion, they will behave shamelessly toward things. Is this not a superficial way of transforming people? Zhu Xi adds, although they will probably not dare to do anything bad, the tendency to do bad will never leave them. The master said, at 15, I set my mind upon learning. At 30, I took my place in society. At 40, I became free of doubts. At 50, I understood heaven's mandate. At 60, my ear was attuned. And at 70, I could follow my heart's desires without overstepping the bounds of propriety. We have here Confucius' spiritual autobiography. We can see his evolution as encompassing three pairs of stages. In the first pair, stage 1 and 2, the aspiring gentleman commits himself to the Confucian way, submitting to the rigors of study and ritual practice until these traditional forms have been internalized to the point that he is able to take his place among others. In the second pair, the practitioner begins to feel truly at ease with this new manner of being, and is able to understand how the Confucian way fits into the order of things and complies with the will of heaven. The clarity and sense of ease this bring with it leads to the final two stages, where one's dispositions have been so truly harmonized with the dictates of normative culture that one accords with them spontaneously. That is stage of Wu Wei. Some interpretations take the ear being attuned to mean that Confucius, at this point, immediately apprehends the subtle content of teaching. He hears some that there is no conflict between his inner dispositions, and the teaching of the sages, and somewhat of these things. As Li Chong explains, having an attuned ear means that, upon hearing the exemplary teachings of the former kings, one immediately apprehended their virtuous conduct and following the models of Lord. Nothing goes against the tendencies of one's heart, as Huang Kang explains. By age 70, Confucius reached a point where training and inborn nature were perfectly meshed, like a raspberry vine growing among hem, naturally standing upright without the need for support. Therefore, he could then give free rein to his heart's intentions without overstepping the exemplary standards. Or as Zhu Xi explains it, being able to follow one's heart's desires without transgressing exemplary standards means that one acts with ease, hitting the mean without forcing it. Meng Yizi asked about filial piety. The master replied, "Do not disobey." Later, Fang Xi was driving the master's chariot. The master said to him, "Just now Meng Yizi asked me about filial piety, and I answered, 'Do not disobey.'" Fang Xi said, "What did you mean by that?" The master replied, "When your parents are alive, serve them in accordance with the rites. When they pass away, bury them in accordance with the rites and sacrifice to them in accordance with the rites." Confucius' initial response is ambiguous. The most natural way to take it will be, "Do not disobey your parents," and this is presumably how Meng Yizi understood it. In his elaboration to Fang Xi, however, Confucius reveals that he had something else in mind. The locus of obedience should be the rites. There are differing interpretations concerning the identity of Meng Yizi, with the most coherent identifying him as an official in Confucius' native state of Lu, the head of Meng, clan of the infamous three families, the de facto rulers of Lu, criticized in Book 3 for their ritual excesses. Confucius' elaboration of his answers to Meng Yizi is thus intended as a rebuke of the three families in general, and Meng Yizi in particular. Ritual property takes precedence over obedience to one's parents' unethical customs. The ritual excesses of the three families thus give Confucius injunctions to bury them in accordance with the rites and sacrifice to them in accordance with the rites added by it. Wei Guan notes that one may ask why Confucius didn't give the full explanation to Meng Yizi himself, and instead reserved it for Fan Qi. The answer, he says, is that Meng Yizi wished to employ Confucius, and Confucius wished to use this encounter to demonstrate to Fan Qi that he wasn't the type of person worthy of compromising oneself for. The exchange is thus an educational opportunity for Fan Qi rather than Meng Yizi, who is presumably beyond hope at this point. Meng Wubo asked about filial piety. The master replied, "Give your parents no cause for anxiety other than the possibility that they might fall ill." Meng Wubo is the son of the Meng Yizi from 2.5. The grammar of this passage is ambiguous, and many commentators and translators have taken it to mean, when it comes to one's parents, one is worried only that they may fall ill, but it's more convincing to see the focus as being upon the son's behavior. As Huang Kang explains, the point is that a son should constantly be respectful, careful, and self-possessed, and shouldn't engage in illicit behavior that will cause his parents undue worry. It is only the state of physical health that is something beyond one's ability to control or predict, and therefore worth worrying about. Ziyu asked about filial piety. The master said, "Nowadays, Filial means simply being able to provide one's parents with nourishment, but even dogs and horses are provided with nourishment. If you are not respectful, wherein lies the difference? The focus here is upon the importance of internal involvement when it comes to virtuous behavior, respect encompassing both manner of behaving and emotional attitude. Zizean asked about filial piety. The master said, "It is the demeanor that is difficult. If there is work to be done, disciplines shoulder the burden, and when wine and food are served, elders are given precedence. But surely filial piety consists of more than this." A convincing way of understanding this passage is to see it as building upon the clarifying 2:7, in which case demeanor should be understood as referring to one's internal emotional state as revealed in one's features. As Zizean puts it, the point of this passage is that even respect doesn't constitute filial piety unless it is accompanied by affection. Taking upon the burden of work to be done and offering sustenance are the sort of things disciples or students do to show reverence for their elders. Serving one's parents, on the other hand, involves in addition deep affection, a harmonious disposition, and a willing heart. Xiandian gives an historical example. When King Wen was the crown prince and participated in the court audiences of Wang Ji, his father, he would ask the eunuch 3 times every day whether or not the prime minister was feeling well that day. When they replied that he was well, King Wen's demeanor became suffused with joy. When they replied that he is unwell, King Wen's demeanor became filled with anxiety. He would be so shaken that even his gait became unsteady. This is what is meant by "it is the demeanor that is difficult." True filial piety involves not only the respect due to any elder family member, but in addition a kind of spontaneous, profoundly affectionate bond. The master said, "I can talk all day long with Han Yui without him once disagreeing with me. In this way, he seems a bit stupid, and yet when we retire and I observe his private behavior, I see that it is in fact worthy to serve as an illustration of what I have taught. Hui is not stupid at all." Herein our first mention of Confucius' favorite disciples, Han Yui. In the text, we get a clear identification that there is something special about him. Some commentaries, particularly the early ones, assume that the private behavior that Confucius observes is Yan Hui engaged in informal conversation with other disciples, while other commentaries believe that Confucius is observing Yan Hui's behavior when he is alone in solitary repose. Line 3 of following passage, "discover where it is that he feels at ease," suggests that later reading. In any case, the point is that Hui doesn't disagree or ask questions because he immediately comprehends everything that he is taught, suggesting that he might be one of those superior few who are born knowing it, unlike those such as Confucius who must learn in order to know the way. The master said, "Look at the means a man employs, observe the basis from which he acts, and discover where it is that he feels at ease. Where can he hide? Where can he hide?" This is, how can his true character remain hidden? A person's character is not properly judged by his words or public reputation, but is rather revealed to one who carefully observes his actual behavior, comes to know something about his motivations, and discovers what he is like in private. It is in the details of one's daily behavior that true virtue is manifested. The good person feels at home in goodness. The master said, "Both keeping past teachings alive and understanding the present, someone able to do is worthy of being a teacher." There is a commentarial disagreement over whether this passage refers to keeping ancient teachings alive or to keeping what one has previously learned in a lifetime current in one's mind so that one knows what to expect in future. The role of the teacher would suggest the former. Liao points out, however, that passage such as informed as to what has gone before, you know what is to come, seem congruent with the latter interpretation. The master said, "The gentleman is not a vessel." Key, literally a ritual vessel or implement designed to serve a particular function, is also used metaphorically to refer to people who are specialized in one particular task, although some commentators take this passage to mean that the gentleman is universally rather than narrowly skilled. The point seems rather that the gentleman is not a specialist. As Li Guangdi explains, we call a vessel someone who is established a name for himself on the basis of a single ability. Consider Zilu's ability to collect taxes, Ran Yu's ability to serve as a steward, Going Xiao's ability to regulate the etiquette of host and guest, and even Zigong's ability to serve as a precious jade vessel. These are all cases of being a vessel in this sense. The learning of the gentleman emphasized the perfection of virtue over attainment in the arts, and perfection in behavior over the mere accomplishment of tasks. Somewhere in Yan Hui's manner of seeing and hearing, speaking and moving, or Zhengzi's appearance, attitude, and demeanor, we can discern the working of virtue. This is what it means to not serve as a vessel, taking this passage to mean that there is nothing the gentleman doesn't know or nothing that he cannot do is simply to fall back into the trap of vessel thinking. Zigong asked about the gentleman. The master said, "He first expresses his views and then acts in accordance with them." We see here again the suspicion of glibness, the tendency of people to talk the talk without walking the talk. The gentleman is trustworthy and consistent. The master said, "The gentleman is broad and not partial. The pretty person is partial and not broad." Early commentaries tend to take this passage as referring to social associations. The gentleman comes together openly with others in accordance with general principles of trustworthiness and role-specific dutifulness, whereas the petty person relies upon secret, partisan connections. Alternately, one might see this as a reference to the scope of one's social circle. The gentleman associates widely with others, the literal sense of zoo, and thus is broad-minded, while the petty person falls into narrow cliches that restrict his vision. Later commentaries often understand it in terms of learning. The gentleman understands the broad, overarching principles of the way, whereas the petty person becomes stuck in biases, trivialities, and details. The latter interpretations seems to resonate better with other passages in this book, such as the idea that the gentleman is not a specialist and that he doesn't become mired in heterodox teachings. The master said, "If you learn without thinking about what you have learned, you will be lost. If you think without learning, however, you will fall into danger." As Baoshan notes, if one learns but doesn't reflectively seek out the meaning of what is being taught, one will be lost and will have gained nothing from it. Some commentators, such as He Yan, take Dai, danger, in its alternate sense of exhaustion. If one thinks without studying, one will achieve nothing in the end, and will have merely exhausted one's intellectual energy for nothing. Learning requires the active participation of students, but also imposes essential structure upon the students' activities. The master said, working from the wrong starting point will lead to nothing but harm. Later commentators take wrong starting point, Yuduan, as heterodox teachings, arguing that Confucius had in mind Daoism, Yangzuism, or Moism, but this seems anachronistic. Cheng Shure notes that there are hints of proto-Mohist teachings in 1721 and primitivist ideas in 1304, and it's possible that these are the targets of this passage, but that is more likely to the wrong starting points mentioned are something like the minor ways teachings. Shiado mentioned in 1904 that threatened to bog down the aspiring gentleman. The master said, Zilu, remark well what I am about to teach you. This is wisdom, to recognize what you know as what you know, and recognize what you do not know as what you do not know. An elaborated version of this story, which also links it to 218 below, is found in the Shunzi. Zilu appears to Confucius dressed in what the master deems to be pretentious manner and is therefore scolded. After hurrying out to change into more humble clothing, Zilu reappears and is lectured to by the master. Remark well what I am about to tell you. One who is not careful about his words becomes pompous, and one who is not careful about his behavior becomes a show-off. One who puts on the appearance of knowledge and ability is a petty person. Therefore, when the gentleman knows something, he says, I know it, and when he doesn't know something, he says, I don't know it. This is the essence of speech. When the gentleman is able to do something, he says, I am able to do it, and when he is not able to do something, he says, I am not able to do it. This is the perfection of behavior. We also read in Shunzi the helpful comment, knowing when it's appropriate to speak is wisdom. Knowing when it's appropriate to remain silent is also wisdom. Zizean asked about obtaining official position. Confucius said, if you first learn as much as you can, then guard against that which is dubious and speak carefully about the rest. You will seldom speak in error. If you first observe as much as you can, then guard against that which is perilous and carefully put the rest into action. You will seldom have cause for regret. If in your speech you seldom err, in your behavior you seldom have cause for regret, an official position will follow naturally. If the gentleman can concentrate on the internal goods of the Confucian practice, the whole panoply of external goods, official position, material worth, renown, will likely follow naturally, in an wu-wei fashion. There is no guarantee that this happen, though since such external goods are subject to vagaries of fate. Therefore, the sole proper attitude of the gentleman is to focus on what is within his control, becoming a good person, as we read in Mencius 6a:16. There are heavenly official honors and human official honors. The heavenly honors are such things as benevolence, rightness, dutifulness, and trustworthiness, and an unflagging joy in goodness. The human honors are such things as being declared a duke, minister, or counselor. The ancient cultivated the heavenly honors, and the human honors followed naturally. People nowadays cultivate the heavenly honors only as a means to obtaining the human honors, and once they get the latter, they abandon the former. This is the ultimate in delusion and, in the end, can only lead to disaster. Confucius' response to Zizean is, does no doubt intend to correct what he sees as an excessive focus on external goods. Duke Ai asked, "What can I do to induce the common people to be obedient?" Confucius replied, "Rise up the straight and apply them to crooked, and the people will submit to you. If you raise up a crooked and apply them to the straight, the people will never submit." The metaphor for the virtuous influence of superiors found here and in 1222 below recalls of the image of the press frame for straining out crooked wood that became a favorite of Shunxi's for describing the process of self-cultivation. The reference is to the salutary effect of moral officials upon the virtue of the common people. Cf. the wind and grass metaphor in 1219. Duke Ai was the nominal ruler of Confucius' native state of Lu. As Jiangxi comments, Duke Ai was present with the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and sagely words filled his state. If he had simply raised them up and employed them, he could have become the true king of Lu. Unfortunately, he cared only for sensual pleasures and left control of the administration to a flock of evildoers. As a result, the hearts of people were filled with the resentment. Duke Ai was troubled by this state of affairs and so asked this question of Confucius. Yi Kangzi asked, "How can I cause the common people to be respectful, dutiful, and industrious?" The master said, "Oversee them with dignity, and the people will be respectful. Oversee them with loyalty and kindness, and the people will be dutiful. Oversee them by raising up the accomplished and instructing those who are unable, and the people will be industrious." Here, Confucius is speaking to someone who wields real power in the state of Lu, Ji Kangxi, head of the most powerful of the infamous three families, who were the de facto but illegitimate rulers of Lu. He received similar advice about ruling from Confucius in 1270-1290. Below, essentially, make yourself virtuous and the people will follow. Some people said to Confucius, "Why is it that he is not participating in government?" Upon being informed of this, the master remarked, "The Book of Documents says, filial, also filial, friendly to one's elders and juniors." In this way, exerting an influence upon those who govern. Thus, in being a filial son and good brother, one is already taking part in government. What need is there, then, to speak of participating in government? There are probably two layers of meaning here. The more general point is that one should do government through not doing, wu wei, that is, by perfecting oneself, as Master Yu puts it in 1-2, establishing the roots of virtue and letting the rest flow naturally through the power of one's personal example and virtue. Some commentators also see here an indirect criticism of the Ji family, whose usurpation of power in Lu involved shocking mistreatment of parents and brothers. The master said, "I cannot see how a person devoid of trustworthiness could possibly get along in the world. Imagine a large ox-drawn cart without a linchpin for its yoke, or a small horse-drawn cart without a linchpin for its collar. How could they possibly be driven?" Most commentators understand this is a comment upon an individual's character, the linchpin of trustworthiness linking together one's word and one's actions, as in Zhu Xi's comment that the words of a person devoid of trustworthiness have no substance, or Ames and Rosamond's observation that, like the carriage pins, making good on one's word is the link between saying and doing. It may also, however, be a comment on society as a whole, requiring as it does the mutual trust inspired by trustworthiness in order to function, as in Zizean's comment that among people trustworthiness is the linchpin of social relations and mutual support. The portrayal of trustworthiness as a metaphorical linchpin here contrasts with the passages such as 113, where the importance of trustworthiness is downplayed. Zizean asked, "Can we know what it will be like 10 generations from now?" The master responds, "The yin followed the riches of the Xia, altering them only in ways that we know. The Zhu followed the rituals of the yin, altering them only in ways that we know. If some dynasties succeed the Zhu, we can know what it will be like even 100 generations from now." Although the object of knowledge in Zizean's question is not specified, we can imagine there is something like way of life, which of course is defined by ritual observance. Zhu Xi's commentary here is helpful. The three dynasties, Xia, Yin, Zhu, succeeded one another, each following its predecessors and unable to change its predecessors' ways. The only sort of alternations made involved such minor matters as standards for ritual emblems, and all of their past traces can be fully observed today. Thus, if in the future some king arises to succeed the Zhou, the manner in which he will follow or make alterations to ritual will not exceed what we have seen in the past. This will be true even 100 generations hence, let alone only 10 generations. This is the manner in which the sage, Confucius, judged the future, unlike those students of prophetic and occult arts who arose in later generations. As Hu Ango notes, Zizean probably asked his question wanting to know about the future, but the sage enlightened him by directing his attention toward the past. As far as we can tell, fortune-telling was as prevalent in Confucius' age as in present-day China. Confucius wasn't interested in such occult practices and wished to focus his disciples' attention on something more morally useful, the practices of the ancients. The master said, "To sacrifice to spirits that are not one's own is to be presumptuous. To see what is right, but to fail to do it, is to be lacking in courage." As Huang Gan observes, the former refers to doing that which one is not supposed to do, and the latter to not doing what one's supposed to do. Gui can refer to either previously human, ancestral spirits or non-human spirits dwelling in the landscape. The latter reading allows us to connect this passage to 3.6 below, where the head of the Ji family sacrifices to Mantai, a spirit that is not his own. Louis Banon records an anonymous observation that attempts to map both halves of 224 onto 3.6. That is not one's own, while Rankui's failure to prevent the Ji family from doing so even though he was serving under them in an official position, is a case of seeing what is right to do but failing to do it.